not simply differential, but are also equivalential between themselves. And a relation of equivalence is exactly what subverts a differential relation. So there is no square circle by which these two contradictory moments of equivalence and difference can be brought to a logical unity. And here is where the notion of radical investment comes into the fore. Because the only way in which this object, necessary for signification, but impossible because of the logic which constitutes its emergence, the only way in which it can be created, of course in a distorted way, is by investing one particular element of the system with the function of totalizing it. That is to say, on the one hand, it is a particular element, but on the other hand, is something which clothes itself the totality. This relationship by which a particular element, without ceasing to be particular, assumes the function of representation of a totality which is incommensurable with itself, is exactly what I call a hegemonic relation. So, an element managed to become a center on the basis of investing a certain particularity with this function. But what is important here in this analysis is that this operation, this hegemonic operation, can only be possible on the basis of the radical exclusion of an element which remains outside the system. So that the element, the dimension of the antagonism is constitutive of the creation of any type of identity. The kind of incompletion of the system is exactly what makes possible partial completions of the type that I have referring to. This moment of the exclusion of the element, of one element, is exactly what creates the antagonistic frontier. And as you see in this type of model, the antagonistic frontier is constitutive, is something which cannot be subsumed under a deeper objectivity. You would, those of you who are interested in set theory would know that this is a bit also the function that the empty set plays in order to obtain a certain closure of the all other subsets. Finally, another dimension that I want to point out is that seeing things in this way involves that all objectivity is essentially rhetoric. Why? You have a relation, a relation which is rhetorical when figurality enters from the beginning into the process of constitution. For instance, Cicero used to say that we use figurality, tropological displacement of terms, because there are more objects to be to name in the world than the words that our language has at its disposal. Now, for him this was an empirical limitation, but we know very well for everything we have said before that is not a question of an empirical deficiency which could be eliminated through a more thorough, through a more developed kind of language. What we are having here is, on the contrary, a blind spot within signification, this object which is at the same time necessary and impossible for the reasons that I have mentioned, which is going to transform all representation in a figural one. And in this sense, rhetoricity is something which is inherent to any kind of objectivity that society can have. Thank you.
So we still have some time for some questions.
Looking at the moment of
Maybe
clash.
Loudly because I...
Can you hear me now?
Yes, okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Let's try.
I'm thinking about the moment of clash which escapes representation.
Yes.
When I imagine the two antagonistic identities as equally, like atomistic, individualized, separated out from social structures, I can still conceptualize what you're saying, but these identities are not divorced from social structures. The moment I place them within social structures, and I'm thinking of post-conflict truth and reconciliation commissions, there is obviously an unequal power structure between the antagonists, for example, the apartheid in South Africa. How do we even have justice commissions if we think about moments of clash totally escaping representations? Did I make my question clear?
Repeat the last bit.
Okay. How do we, if the basic assumption is representation of antagonisms totally escape...
Representation of what?
Representations.
Of what?
Of antagonisms. Antagonisms.
Antagonism.
Yes,
Okay.
sorry. If the assumption is representations of antagonisms totally, they cannot be represented at all, how do we have truth and reconciliation commissions where the conflict situation in itself was mismatched in terms of unequal power relationships?
Well, I can answer you the general issue that you are raising, but not the specific South African situation, because
That's okay, but how do we even have truth and reconciliation commissions where we acknowledge that there was state power behind one antagonist and there wasn't?
I don't know about the reconciliation commission, but I can answer the more general issue that we are.
Sure.
The basic problem is, as you see in the sociological literature, what happened is that the explanation is objective up to a certain point. For instance, you start saying there was an increase in the international demand for wheat. The landowners wanted to increase production. In order to increase production, they had to expel the peasant from the land. And there, the explanation is interrupted, and it is said, and in this condition, the peasant necessarily had to react. So, ceases to be an objective explanation, and is an appeal to your common sense or your intuition to provide something that the sociological text as such is not providing. This is exactly the moment of the clash. What could happen is a process of dilution of antagonism. That is to say that the antagonism does not continue to the last confrontation, but there is an attempt to produce this tension, and when you if you are successful in providing this tension, obviously what is going to do is that going to happen is that the antagonism as such will tend to be weakened and finally will disappear. I think the little I know about the example that you mentioned is that it was an attempt precisely to bring to the same table, if you want, to the same space for representation in my term, forces which up to that moment had been in a total confrontation. No? That is the way I would explore the thing.
So it's basically a balance of powers towards which antagonism.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I appreciated your lecture, thank you. I have a question about the radical investment in the element outside of the system. And I wonder if we might turn it inward and make a radical investment in the idea that perhaps all elements coexist simultaneously by eschewing linearity or this procession, a linear concept of time. That somehow we can think about all of the elements existing both as process and totality, that they are equal to each other. So they're all contained within the system instead of necessitating an element outside the system, which seems to me to be very much part of the idea of the Christian Trinity, which allows for the coexistence, the simultaneous coexistence of the Godhead, the predetermined figure of Jesus, and the Holy Spirit, this Christian Trinitarian concept, that they coexist at the same time, that there's an omnipresence, omnipotence, omniscience, that all coexist instead of needing something outside the system.
Yes, well, okay. Let me clarify what I understand by investment. By investment, I mean that one element is overdetermined by representing not only itself, but a plurality of other elements. And at some point, this process leads to a situation that this element cannot be overtaken by other systems of other forms of thought. To give you an example, the rat man in Freud. You have a term rat, which is in a common term of our vocabulary. But in the case of the rat man complex, there was on the one hand money, on the other hand the father, on the other hand finally sexuality, and all of them coalesce around this term, which in this sense was invested by a plurality of extra meanings and give to it an absolute centrality. This is what I basically understand by investment. The point is that in this investment you have both the dimension of rhetoricity and the dimension of the limits of representation to which I am referring. Because if the word rat has all these meanings associated to it, in that case, rat functions as a metaphor for many other things which have nothing to do with rats, but which have to do with the currents of thought associated with a rat. The same thing, I think, politically happened. At some point, for instance, the name of a leader comes to signify many things which are completely different from the leader as such. And this pluralization of meaning is what gives to the notion of investment is important. This